Today, our talk is going to come from Terence Ogle, one of my mentors. He's been with Map for Life for many years. He has a lot of experience, and today he's going to be talking about the 3 R's. And I'm going to hand over straight to Terence.
Good evening. Thanks for that introduction, Heather, and good evening to all the listeners out there. As Heather said, my topic this evening is reflect, reset, recharge, the 3 R's. And in fact, since I decided on the topic, I've added another R, and that word is renewal. So reflect, reset, recharge equals renewal. I'm looking forward to having a frank discussion with you around those particular three R's. So to begin with, I don't think anybody would deny the fact that we live in a very hectic world. It's extremely fast-paced. Our lives are full of noise and haste. We rush around from one activity to the next, literally 24 hours a day. And it's only getting worse. And in addition to this, our world is overtaken by wars, by poverty, by pandemics, natural disasters. The list goes on. And in the process, unfortunately, our anxiety levels go up. People begin to give in. People begin to give up, resulting in escalating suicide rates. Society is in fact grasping for solutions. But enough of this negative stuff. What I am about to share with you, some would consider a coping mechanism. I consider it to be more than just a coping mechanism. Because if we make this practice of reflecting and retesting and that whole process, if we follow that and recharging, if we make that part of our lives, an integral part of our lives, I firmly believe that it can lead to transformed and fulfilled lives. So let me begin by addressing the first practice, reflection. Taking time to reflect means looking back on one's experiences, on one's actions and emotions. It involves introspection and self-awareness. By reflecting on one's past, one can gain invaluable insights into one's successes, one's challenges, and possible areas for improvement. And this self-awareness can help us to make more informed decisions and grow as people. And I'd like to use the analogy of driving a car. So when you go on a car trip for a long distance, and from a South African context, I would say if you're driving from Johannesburg to Cape Town by car, it's a long journey. And often as a driver in the car, you would look into your rearview mirrors and just sort of think about what's past. That hill that you battled up, maybe have a look at the scenery that you've passed, and it just goes through your mind. And you sort of just relive those moments that you've just passed. And I guess a good driver as well would glance at his dashboard or his or her dashboard and see controls and assess the key controls. What's my petrol consumption looking like? How fast have I been going, etc. And that to me would be a good example of a driver reflecting as he or she goes on their trips. And so too in our lives, as we journey through our lives, I believe it's really valuable for us just to pause and to reflect on what's gone by. As I prepared for this talk, I came across a few interesting thoughts on reflection, and I'd like to share them with you. So the first one is by a company or a group called Zenwork Marketing, and it goes like this. We don't learn by doing, we learn by reflecting on what we've done. Okay, so I'm going to repeat that. We don't learn by doing, we learn by reflecting on what we've done. And the second is by a gentleman named Sorin Kierkegaard, and it goes like this. Life can only be understood backwards, but it must be lived forward. Okay, and I'll repeat as well. Life can only be understood backwards, but it must be lived forward. Okay, so to me, that understanding and that looking back is what reflection is all about. But the second half of that particular quote is just as important. But we can only live going forward. Okay, and then the last one, my favorite actually, is the unexplained life is not worth living. The unexplained life is not worth living. And that's a quote from Socrates, the philosopher. And just to share with you some practical ways to reflect, one can meditate. Journaling is a very good way of reflecting. A process called mind dumping, where you just unload everything in your mind onto a paper, onto a whiteboard. Just clear your mind. Taking a walk in nature, that helps reflecting. Talking to yourself. So this one I found a bit strange, but the suggestion here is to talk to yourself and talk out loud, okay, so that you can actually hear what you're saying. And that is an effect of actually taking what you've spoken out and taking it into a deeper level. And the cynical people would say, as long as you don't answer yourself, you're okay. But try talking to yourself. Gratitude journaling definitely helps reflections. It's a journal and be grateful for all that's happened to you and become part of you. I think there's far more ways of reflection, and my recommendation is use what works for you. Use what works for you. The important thing though is do reflect. Okay, and then a cautionary note on reflecting. Avoid dwelling in this reflective mode, especially if that reflection includes negative circumstances. The past is not a place to camp. And as the good South Africans would say, the past is not a place to care. It's purely a place to pop in and out. So again, to use a driving analogy, if one is driving and you spend too much time looking in the rearview mirror, right, and not looking forward, you're very likely to miss a bend in the road ahead of you and ultimately crash because of your focus on looking in the rearview mirror. Just linger in reflection long enough to garner some learnings and move on. Remember, life is lived forward. The next component, resetting. The reset phase involves letting go of negative energy, letting go of stress, letting go of burdens from the past. It's really about giving oneself permission to start anew without being weighed down by past mistakes or setbacks. So after having reflected, park those reflections and use them purely just to reset on the way forward. And this mental, emotional, and physical reset, because you reflect in 3 different areas of your life: the mental, the mind, the emotional, the soul, and the physical, the body. This resetting can be incredibly liberating and allows one to approach life with a fresh and a new perspective. Resetting also involves adjusting and tweaking. Okay, so having reflected and seen where things need to change, uh, one needs to adjust and tweak certain things in one's life. And a great tool to use for this tweaking and adjusting is in Map for Life, and it's called the Quick Assessment Tool, and it's found on page 30 of the 2023 blueprint. And really, what it entails is for each area of one's wheel of life, consider, based on the reflection, these following questions. What should I stop doing? What should I start doing? What should I do more of? And what should I do less of? And I've added a fifth one, which is not in the blueprint, and it is, what should I continue doing? It's almost like, as you were, just do the same thing that you've been doing. It's working for you. So there's no need to adjust it in any way. Just continue as you have been. A cautionary when it comes to resetting is, be gentle on yourself. We are all human. None of us is perfect. And it's important not to drag into the resetting process any negativity, stress, regret, heavy-mindedness that's come from that reflection. And they will be. Reflection isn't always about the good things that have happened in one's life, but also of the negative things. But it is important to leave those in the past and just take the learnings from those. So the message there is reset and move on. Recharging, the third and final component of this practice. And this is my really favorite component, because it's invigorating and it really gets me going. So as I already stated, we are composed of body, mind, and soul, physical, mental, and emotional. And we need to focus on recharging all three. Okay. It's important that these three dimensions of who we are as human beings are in harmony. If any one of them is out of kilter, the other two will be impacted negatively as well. This phase is essentially all about self-care and taking time to nurture oneself. The type of activities one would engage in this recharging process is to participate in activities that bring one joy, relaxation, and fulfillment. It could be spending time in nature. It could be just practicing mindfulness, pursuing a hobby, exercising, or just spending quality time with loved ones. I mean, I myself, I recharge by going on a fishing trip. And my dear wife often tells me that or reminds me rather, that I haven't caught a fish yet. And I respond by saying, it's not about the fish, it's about the process of fishing. And I really enjoy just sitting at a dam with the rod in, hoping to catch a fish. But if I don't, no, it gives me time to do, in fact, all three of the practices. It gives me time to reflect, to reset, and mostly to recharge. So I'm not giving up on my fishing just yet. I will catch a fish eventually, I'm sure of that. So ways to recharge. There are many ways to recharge. And I think, again, like the other two practices, each of us must find those ways that resonate with us, that we feel comfortable with, and that add benefit to us. So in our road trip analogy, recharging could be, for example, pulling off the road. So you're on this highway, you've traveled for a couple of hours and quite a few kilometers. You're feeling tired and you need to recharge physically, but you also need to make sure that your car is in a state to get you to your ultimate destination. So, you pull up at a fuel station, you fill fuel, you'll buy refreshments at the convenience store if necessary, you might take a leg stretch. You might even sleep over in a motel along the road, you know. So that's all part of recharging in the analogy, and holds true for recharging in life as well. The cautionary note when it comes to recharging is that recharging must result in an action. You don't recharge just for the sake of recharging. So one recharges, which should lead to an action, which then leads to progress on your life's journey. So for the entire process, the reflect, reset, recharge, one of the most important aspects, I believe, is to consider the environment. Okay. There are environments that are conducive to the practice, and there are those that are not. And I firmly believe, you know, that the kind of habitats which we are currently in are not the ones that we were originally designed for. I don't believe we were, for example, designed to live in concrete jungles. You know, I don't believe that was the natural design for us to live in cities. If it were so, then I do believe that God would have said, you know what, I'm going to create this beautiful city, and I'm going to then create Adam and Eve. He didn't. He chose the Garden of Eden, right? And I think if one has a look at the difference between sort of a Garden of Eden and a concrete jungle such as New York City, Johannesburg, etc., they're vastly different. And you know, one can actually make a list of the differences. One is stressful, one is stress-free, right? One is natural, one is unnatural. One is hectic, one is calm. You know, so I believe our natural inclination is to move towards the Garden of Eden type environment. Now, realistically, the Garden of Eden type environment is often not accessible for various reasons. It could be financial, it could be just they're too far, it could be busyness, etc. So what we have to do to create an environment that is fairly conducive is we have to improvise. So, for example, in one's home, you know, you look for a quiet spot, a quiet room, you know, where you're feeling comfortable. Maybe you're fortunate enough to have a yard. You could, you know, select a place out in the yard. The important thing is remove the noise and the cluster and the interruptions from your environment as much as possible to allow yourself that space to go through the reflection, the resetting, and the recharging. So environment is absolutely key. Another point that is important is be conscious of the time that you actually do these practices and your frame of mind as you embark on them. It's inadvisable, for example, to begin the process after a long day at work when you're mentally and emotionally tired. You're going to be distracted, and it's not going to do justice to the process. The other thing I would advise is journal. So journal the outcomes from the process. And you don't need to journal immediately. So what I normally do is I go through my reflection, I go through the resetting, and maybe not the recharging, but soon after the reflection and the resetting, I try and get to my journal and just jot down the main points that have come out of the first two processes. You know, it helps me to, for one, remember, to rethink, to maybe reflect. But then it's down there, and a year later I can look back and say, oh, you know what, this is where I was in a year past, and this is where I am now. So just gauging, you know, progress. So my favorite environment for this practice is retreats. You know, I simply love retreats, and I would jump at any opportunity to go on a retreat. And a retreat really is essentially a purposeful withdrawal or a period of seclusion, typically undertaken for relaxation, reflection, or personal development. And there are different types of retreats, but they're also organized in different settings. Environment is extremely important. So settings such as nature reserves, spiritual centers, wellness resorts, or even corporate training facilities, depending on where those facilities um, are often used for retreats. So what retreats do is they offer participants an opportunity to step away, to withdraw from their regular routines and immerse themselves in a focused and often transformative experience. Retreats are able to address all components of the practice. They are able to address reflection, resetting, and recharging, as well as all the three dimensions of one's being. So they'll address the physical, for example, through hikes into nature. They'll address the mental, the mind component through meditation and mindfulness exercises. They can address the emotional, the soul, through spiritual teachings, appreciating nature, etc. So I believe retreats are extremely useful method of actually reinventing and refreshing ourselves. So in conclusion, the reflect, reset, recharge cycle is not necessarily a linear one. Okay, so you don't necessarily just start and then with reflect, reset, recharge. You probably find that if you make it an integral part of your life, at different stages of your life, you're at different stages of the three practices for different aspects of one's life. So in the one area, you might be deeply reflecting on your family relationships, right? But in another area, you might already be resetting in sort of a financial aspect of one's life. So it doesn't have to be linear. The ideal is really to make it a habit, to make it a normal part of one's life, to constantly um, do the three practices. And yes, the duration might be different. You might go on a retreat, a week-long retreat at some stage, and at other time it might take a 10-minute break during a lunchtime where you find that little space and that little time to reflect on a very specific area of your life. So whether you use this practice daily, weekly, or during specific life transitions, it can be, and it is, a helpful guide to living a more intentional, a more purposeful, and a more fulfilling life. And is that not what we all seek? I wish you well on your life's journey, and I thank you for your time. Thank you.
Thank you, Terence. That was wonderful. Reflect, reset, recharge, and then adding that fourth renewal. Was it you said, or renewable? Because I
Renewal.
felt
So, yeah.
renewal. I felt like I could use the two words interchangeably. Um, I think a lot of times people do this subconsciously, and I've only tended to focus on it with my goals. And I want to welcome Glen Leece-Jones because he's going to discuss this with me. Now, Glen, with me only using it for my goals, and Terence touched on several other areas one could use it on. How best can we use this cycle?
Absolutely. Thanks very much for the opportunity, and well spoken, Terence. Very interesting.
Thank you, Glenn.
It's interesting that I actually wrote down something over here, and I said that I really believe we actually do these things automatically in terms of reflecting, resetting, recharging. But I don't necessarily think we do it with intention or intent. However, if you're talking about goal setting, that's definitely doing it with intent. And that's really good. I really believe that needs to be done. We need to be doing these goals. And so often when I talk to people about goals, they go, oh, no, I'm not interested in the goal setting thing. But But that's actually quite sad, because in terms of that goal setting, especially using and applying the Map for Life methodology, it can be an amazing thing to do. And we often talk in Map for Life about the concept of, are you living by default or are you living by design? So yeah, so really, to answer your question, Heather, I think it's an excellent idea in terms of the goal setting. I also do believe, however, that I'd like to take it a step further and say that I sometimes do things like this with my wife. We will go and sit at a coffee shop and just have a good cup of coffee and sit and chat about things. I've in actual fact just set up an appointment with my daughter for tomorrow to go and sit with her and actually discuss a few things about reflecting the past and what's in the future, and how things are happening with her at the moment. So I think it's such an important aspect. I really think it's a brilliant thing to do. I really do.
Thank you. You were talking about reflecting, and I like the idea of reflecting with family. Terence, you used the quote there: "We don't learn by doing, we learn by reflecting." But haven't you ever gone through a phase of, I don't want to reflect because I don't want to know? What would you say to somebody who's got that attitude?
Yeah, no, reflection is not always a pleasant process. It's not, because there are times you have to reflect. Like I said earlier, none of us is perfect, so there will be stuff that we regret having done, or or times where we just regret how we handle certain things. But we've got to deal with it, because it does require honesty. Ultimately, it's being honest with ourselves, and it's only when we're honest with ourselves then that we can move forward. But I really like what Glenn mentioned about reflecting with others, with others that are close to you, that you trust, right? Because what that does, it adds the dimension of accountability to the action that you take, the resetting, and it even encourages the recharging. So I like that idea. So but it will always be, I believe, with people that you trust, and that you've got confidence that they got your back. Yeah, I don't know, Keith, have I answered your question?
No, it's just making me think now. So reflecting is more like opening my eyes. But now
Yes.
and again, I find myself being a little bit cheeky and trying to reflect on other people's lives, trying to help them with their reflection instead of focusing on my own reflection. Now, you gave us some examples of how to reflect: the meditate, the journaling. A lot of people think, Glenn, that journaling is just for little girls, young ladies. You know, um, how would you advise or suggest to a young lad as to how he can begin journaling?
Absolutely, yeah. It's an excellent question, Heather. Again, it's that stigma and that concept of, oh no, who journals nowadays? What's that for? It's for little girls. But for me, in fact, interesting enough, I was just chatting about this concept this morning at our Map Cafe, and discussing that idea of the thoughts that we have, and actually taking a physical pen, and putting pen to paper and writing it down. It's just such an amazing aspect. For me, it's almost like planting seed. And the seed has been nurtured as a result of that, as you're writing things down. It also has that concept of getting thoughts out of your mind. And I often joke about it. I say, if it's in the back of your mind, it's going to stay there. It's in the back there somewhere, and you're going to battle to get it out. But if you physically put pen to paper and write things down, you are seeing it. You're possibly even hearing it, because Terence spoke about the fact that you've got to talk, and talk loud. You hear yourself. You're using senses, and it becomes such an amazing, effective tool. I must admit, I started journaling many, many years ago, and I still do to this day, and it's fascinating. I think another very important aspect is, in terms of that reflection, in terms of writing things down, what I often do is I go back to journals of years ago. And the fascinating thing to me is that certain things that I've written down have actually come to pass, in terms of goals, in terms of ideas, etc. And that's a positive has such an incredible positive effect on someone, especially me too.
Yeah. Absolutely.
Yeah,
Heather, can I come in there?
yes, of course.
I just want to reinforce what Lena said. Journaling is powerful, and for a while, when I thought I'm comfortable with technology, and I'm reasonably comfortable with technology, but when you're sitting, for example, in church and there's a sermon and you're taking notes, all right? But it's akin to a form of journaling in any case. To use my cell phone and the app that's there to capture my thoughts. I just can't do it. I backlog. Not because of just technical difficulty, but because of the mindset I have. I just, like Glenn said, I love using a pen, and feeling and going through that notes. There's something about writing stuff, and I must actually do more research into it. There's something about writing rather than typing that's just so profound, and it's like, I don't know what it is, but it's different, and I would never give up my manual pen journaling. I've even got to the ridiculous stage where, because I believe blue has these energy. Blue is more energy than black, right? And I was advised sometime to use a blue pen. It might sound silly, but honestly, I only journal in a blue pen because mentally it's like I'm in tune. So sorry, That's
No,
it. Sorry.
and with that mind dumping, you can actually journal using the mind dumping, like drawing a big circle and little
Absolutely.
balls around it and dump things there. And I'm just getting a lovely visual of that, except I'd have different color pens going all around.
Yeah.
So
Absolutely.
I've reflected and I know what I need to reset. Okay. Which I do in a way, but I keep digressing. How do I make that reset stick, Glenn? I want it to stick.
Yeah, absolutely. It's called making it a habit.
Yeah.
We so often talk about these issues about habits, and again, Map for Life is all about creating habits and good habits. And one of the issues for me is, as far as habits is concerned, is that it has to be consistent and it has to be daily. We so often talk, once again, in the Map for Life process, that that old adage that says it takes 21 days to make or break a habit. Well, I say it takes a little bit longer than that. And we can go through various aspects and various surveys that have been done, but I mean, effectively, it takes up to 25 to 30 days before the habit really becomes that actual habit, where sometimes the synapses in the brain changes and rewires. And it takes up to 40 days for that habit to really become instilled, and even longer to get to that point where you're actually doing it without even realizing it. And so if I'm going to start journaling, then it mustn't be a case of, okay, now I've got to spend the next hour doing journaling. You're probably not going to get it right, and you're probably going to give it up. Small incremental changes. I actually, in actual fact, had just written down one of the habits I wanted to do is all the various books I've got, I wanted to take half an hour every day and read. And I've just reflected now today, in fact, probably just before I came on board, I looked at my blueprint, my Map for Life book, and I saw that in terms of the recording, didn't make it. And I changed it to 10 minutes instead of half an hour. So I'm trusting that that's going to work now. So really,
that's the tweak. That's the tweak and adjust you were talking about, Terence, isn't it?
Exactly.
So
Absolutely.
as you go on, yeah.
Quite correct.
Absolutely.
You spoke about that tool. What can I stop doing? What can I start doing? What can I do more of? What can I do less of? But most importantly, I like that. What should I continue? So that's sort of like a combination of the reflecting and resetting together. So now I'm ready. I've done my reflection. I've reset and I want to recharge myself. Okay.
Yep.
Because you've used the word recharge, I'm thinking of my batteries, right?
Yep.
I want to get going again. I want to get that enthusiasm going. I want to get that energy going again. And, you spoke about fishing. I have quite a few brothers, and my dad, all up from when I was small, all they did was go fishing. And I used to pest them because I couldn't see what the point was. And I'd say, but you're just sitting there, but you're not doing anything, but you're wasting time. Now, listening to your talk, I can see quite easily how, crikey, they were moving up in strides when it came to personal development, because they were sitting there just staring, and who knows what was going through their mind and through their body.
Exactly.
Now, you spoke about
Exactly.
relaxation, fulfillment, quality time. How, as a unit, as a team, Terence, can we recharge, like in our map cafes? How do we, or in our families, or with our colleagues? How do we recharge as a team?
Yeah, I think the first thing I wanna go back to what Len said about habits, because again with recharging, there's certain activities in recharging that you can actually make a habit of, right? So for example, and I know our colleague Peter Peter loves his park runs. He just simply loves them, and what he does on those park runs is he's recharging physically, he's recharging emotionally, he's feeding his soul and mentally, because as he walks, I'm talking on his behalf, but I mean I'm assuming that's what happens when the few times that I've gone on a park run. That's what I've experienced. Okay, so to answer your question, I mean, there's nothing more, I think, rewarding, for example, on a Saturday morning to go out walking with the entire family. And, it becomes catchy, because once it becomes a habit, like Glenn was saying, you can't do without it, you know. So those are group activities that are recharging individuals, but also are sort of infectious in that they recharge those around you. You on each other's energy. Um, I believe so. Yeah, group recharging is absolutely important. Going on holiday with a family, with a friend. Communities such as Christian communities, our church communities. Um, I would even say, no, I wouldn't say. I'm convinced that even a church meeting, right, that is facilitated correctly, etc. Worship especially, those are recharging activities. And if one enters them with that frame of mind, you get out of that what you're seeking. I feel so refreshed when I come out of a Sunday service or any service, where there's worship and there's a release. You sort of, as long as you can separate yourself from the world and hustle and bustle, and get immersed in an activity that is going to leave you feeling better when you leave that activity than when you came into it. To me, that's recharging. Sorry, a bit long-winded, but yeah.
No, that makes a lot of sense, Terence. Now, we're coming to the close of our discussion, but Glenn, I'm going to put you on the spot here. Currently, in the United Kingdom, a lot of our young people have written their exams, GCSE O levels, and their advanced levels, and results are coming out soon. Now, I'm thinking of a young person who's about to get their results. Okay, if the results are not what they're expecting, how are they going to reflect, reset, recharge, and renew?
Good question. Because with all the pressures of today's life, specifically for young children, it can be a major, major problem. Yeah, it's. I won't go into detail about that, but I think I think that one has to get to a point where you realize that sometimes you will fail.
Hmm.
We are human beings and we fail. Um, I think the first thing, let me take an example as one of my children. If something like that had to take place, I would sit them down and I certainly wouldn't moan and shout and scream and say, "You stupid idiot," and definitely not. Okay. That's the worst thing you can do. But
Yeah.
I would certainly chat and find out, how did the exam go? What was the situation? Did you not study? I mean, was it an issue? And in fact, it actually happened to my son this past exam. We just had one exam that was just a real bad one. And he was quite concerned about it. And I actually sat him down and I said to him, you know, I don't want you to worry about this. There's always ways to overcome things. There's always a solution to the problem. We often talk in South Africa about your normal maths, almost like a higher grade maths, and then there's maths literacy. And I said to him, if push comes to shove, let's downgrade you to maths literacy. And if you really want to, you can always do a bridging course or whatever it might be. If you're taking a gap year, whatever, there's so many different options available to you. It's not the end of the world. You know, so many people are so focused on you've got to get this right, you've got to have this done, you've got to be perfect all the time. And I think in terms of this whole reflecting, resetting, recharging, one has to get to that point where you realize that we're going to make mistakes in life.
Yeah.
We're going to fail sometimes. And that's all part of life. In fact, as far as I'm concerned, it's the best way to learn from making mistakes. So, yeah, it's not an easy conversation, but it is a conversation that needs to be had. The unfortunate thing is that so many parents, I have to be careful what I say here, so many parents are really pushing their children to the extent that it causes major consternation in their lives, major stress, major problems, and it's so unnecessary. Let me say this, and I'll end with that. If I write a test and I get a C on that test, 64%, okay, the mere fact that I've got 64% with C doesn't mean to say that I'm a C person. I have potential. And that potential can still come out, and I can become far more than that. It's just a test that I've got a C on. And that's how we need to look at it. So yeah, I'll stop over there. I think you get the message.
That is brilliant. Just it's an isolated incident. Yeah. Any
Wonderful.
closing words, Terence?
Yeah, no, I've certainly enjoyed this discussion. I think it's added so much value to my thoughts. And I do believe that, you know, topics such as this are topics that one throws out there, and the more we interact and discuss, the more we learn, the more we realize. And, you know, it's like Glenn said, none of us is perfect. And, you know, it's good to have these debates and discussions because we learn from each other. And from tonight, I really appreciate Heather, yourself, and Glenn. Yeah, it's really been great, and I've got some new ideas that I need to jot down now and put into my cap. Thank you very much. I really enjoyed it.
Thank you, Terence, for your talk. Thank you, Glenn, for your comments. And we encourage you to reflect intentionally, to reset, to recharge, and to renew. If you have any questions about this evening's broadcast, just click on the link below and one of us will get back to you. Thank you very much.
Muy buenos días a todos. I am Miguel Sanz from Madrid, Spain. I started using Map for Life back in 2016, where this picture here, where I am with Glenn, belonged to that year in the training I did in Pretoria. And, you know, there are many talks, many talks out there in internet, in real life, where great speakers tells you that you are unique, that you need to find your purpose, what you need to do in life. You end up out of those talks really happy, but naked, because you have no tools. What's Map for Life? Map for Life gives you the tools to achieve your goals, to be precise, to do all the things you need to do to achieve them. You are unique. Be mapped.